Ambiguity. From earliest childhood, Bridget liked to sit on her father's knee. But I believe that by the time she reached 18, she liked sitting there even more. Agnes was not disturbed by this. Bridget would often climb into bed with both parents, especially late in the evening when they all watched TV, and there was greater physical intimacy between the three of them than had been the case between Agnes and her parents. All the same, the ambiguity of the scene did not escape her. An adult young woman with big breasts and a big behind sitting in the lap of an attractive man still in the prime of life, touching his shoulders and cheeks with those aggressive breasts and calling him daddy. Once Agnes held a lively party at her house, to which she had also invited her sister. When everybody was in a very good mood, Bridget sat on her father's lap, and Laura said, "I want to do that too." Bridget moved over to one knee, and so both of them ended up sitting on Paul's lap. This situation reminds us once again of Bettina, because it was she more than anyone else who raised lap sitting to a classical model of erotic ambiguity. I said that she crossed the entire erotic battlefield of her life under the protection of the shield of childhood. She carried this shield into her 50s, then exchanged it for the shield of motherhood, and in turn let young men sit on her lap. And again, it was a marvelously ambiguous situation. A mother must never be suspected of sexual interest in her son, and for that very reason, the position of a young man sitting, even though in a metaphoric sense, on the lap of a mature woman is full of erotic significance that is all the more forceful for being vague. I take the liberty of maintaining that without the art of ambiguity, there is no real eroticism. And the stronger the ambiguity, the more powerful the excitement. Who cannot recall from childhood the wonderful game of doctor? A little girl lies down on the ground and a little boy takes off her clothes under the pretense that he is her doctor. The girl is obedient because it is not a curious little boy who examines her, but a serious gentleman concerned about her health. The erotic content of this situation is enormous as well as mysterious. And the hearts of both are thumping. They are thumping all the harder because the boy mustn't stop being the doctor even for a moment. And as he pulls off the girl's panties, he speaks to her in very formal language. The recollection of this blessed moment of childhood brings back an even more charming memory. A young Czech woman returned in 1969 to a provincial Czech town after a sojourn in Paris. She had left for France in 1967 to study, and when she came back 2 years later, she found her country occupied by a Russian army. People seemed frightened and yearning to find themselves somewhere else. In the course of those 2 years of study, the young Czech woman had been attending seminars compulsory for anyone desiring to be intellectually au courant, in which she learned that during infancy, even before the Oedipal stage, we all go through a period which a famous psychoanalyst called the mirror stage, meaning that before we become aware of our parents' bodies, we become aware of our own. The young Czech woman decided that it was this stage that many of her fellow countrywomen had skipped in their development. Glowing with the glamour of Paris and its famous seminars, she gathered around herself a circle of young women. She expounded a theory that none of them understood and introduced practical exercises that were as simple as the theory was complex. They all undressed completely and looked at themselves in a big mirror. Then they all carefully examined each other, and finally, They held up small pocket mirrors to each other so that they could see parts of their own bodies they hadn't been able to see before. The instructor did not fail even for a moment to treat the group to her theoretical commentaries, whose fascinating incomprehensibility transported everyone far away from the Russian occupation, far from their provincial cares, as well as giving them a certain undefined and undefinable excitement about which they were loath to talk. It is probable that in addition to having been a student of the great Lacan, the group's leader was also a lesbian, but I don't think that the group contained many confirmed lesbians, and I admit that of all those women, I dream most of all of that totally innocent girl for whom during these seances nothing in the world existed except the dark words of Lacan, poorly translated into Czech. Ah, the scholarly meetings of naked women in a house in a provincial Czech town, the streets of which were patrolled by Russian soldiers. How much more exciting than orgies in which everyone tries to do what is required, what is already agreed, and what has only one meaning, one poor meaning and no other. But let us quickly leave the small Czech town and return to Paul's knees. Laura is sitting on one. And for the sake of experiment, let's imagine the other knee occupied not by Bridget, but by her mother. Laura is savoring the pleasant feeling that her behind is touching the man for whom she has been secretly longing. That feeling is all the more titillating because she is sitting on his lap not as a lover, but as a sister-in-law, with the wife's full consent. Laura is the addict of ambiguity. Agnes finds nothing provocative in the situation, but she cannot silence the comical sentence that keeps circling through her mind. Quote, Paul has one female buttock on each knee. Paul has one female buttock on each knee, end of quote. Agnes is the clear-minded observer of ambiguity. Agnes finds nothing provocative in the situation. And Paul, he is noisily joking, raising first one knee, then the other, to keep the two sisters from doubting even for a moment that he is a kind and fun-loving uncle, always willing to indulge in horseplay for his little niece's benefit. Paul is the simpleton of ambiguity. At the height of her amorous suffering, Laura would often ask him for advice, and they would meet in various cafes. Let us note that not one word was ever spoken of suicide. Laura had begged her sister not to mention her morbid ideas to anyone, and she herself had mentioned nothing of them to Paul. So the fine tissue of beautiful sorrow remained unharmed by too brutal an image of death. They would sit facing each other, and now and again they touched each other. Paul would squeeze her hand or pat her on the shoulder as we do to someone whose self-confidence and strength we wish to bolster, because Laura loved Bernard, and loving people deserve help. I am tempted to say that at these moments Paul looked into her eyes, but that would not be accurate, since during that period Laura again began to wear dark glasses. Paul knew that she did so in order to keep him from seeing her tear-stained eyes. The dark glasses suddenly took on many meanings. They gave Laura an air of severe elegance and unapproachability. At the same time, however, they pointed at something very physical and sensual, an eye full of tears, an eye that had suddenly become an opening into the body, one of those 9 beautiful gates into a woman's body, of which Apollinaire sings in his famous poem, a moist opening covered by a fig leaf of dark glasses. On several occasions, the image of tears behind the glasses was so intense and the imagined tears so ardent that they turned into steam, which surrounded them both and deprived them of judgment and sight. Paul noticed the steam, but did he understand its significance? I don't think so. Imagine this situation. A little girl approaches a little boy. She starts taking off her clothes and says, "Doctor, you have to examine me." And the little boy says, "My dear little girl, I am no doctor." This is exactly how Paul behaved.